We're going to meet our first composer, who's Anne-Marie O'Farrell, a very well-known composer, harpist, teacher, and renowned musician. Very prolific, very multi-talented, of all kinds of talents. This is a fabulous opportunity for somebody like you. I mean, even though you've been composing for a long time, you've got a lot of important works under your belt, but to be able to just sit with these players and Gavin and David and just navigate your way through the process.
Yeah, it's a tremendous privilege, and it's one of the essential things for a composer to be able to do, to get access to a live orchestra. There's a lot of talk about, using software and very elaborate packages which disguise what instruments can or can't do, but there's no substitute for meeting the players, finding out what sits under their hands, what lies on their instruments. And I mean, I've written quite a few orchestral works, written 6, and this is my 3rd orchestral premiere in a year, and still I feel every time I just get a little closer maybe to getting the shading that I want. I suppose I think of orchestration a bit like, to pick a kind of simple analogy, those old-fashioned TV test cards, remember the stripy ones? And orchestration is a bit like learning to find all that delicate shading between those colours, and finding where's the bridge between one instrument and another and how you can blend those sounds. Yeah. And even, say, from our workshop in April, there was a section there I decided to rebalance, and I was so happy to hear it then in this evening's rehearsal. It worked out really, really well. But without hearing that live, it's harder to make those decisions.
You've chosen a kind of instruments, a kind of an interesting instrumentation, in that it's not just a regular piece for orchestra. It's almost like a little mini concerto in a way. So why? I know you're a harpist yourself, so naturally you kind of feel an affinity towards the harp, but there's a snare drum given a very prominent
there's a kind of a personal signature with myself and my children. Harp is obvious. My daughter Carmel is a cellist, and my daughter Steph actually is an electric guitarist, but having checked that out early on in the process with Dave, I was given a very clear direction that electric guitar was not going to feature. But percussion is a great love of Steph's, and my nephew Andy O'Farrell, jazz drummer, is here tonight. So we have a special connection with these instruments in the family. And then the initials of A, C and S fall neatly into one of my favourite scales, the Octatonic Scale, or the scale with 8 notes within the octave instead of the more usual 7 or 12. So I had quite a lot of fun with that.
Mm-hmm. And it's fairly commonplace nowadays in music for musicians to be asked to do kind of odd things, a little bit outside their native comfort zones, the sounds that they make on the instruments. So did you ask the musicians here to do anything that they said, whoa, that's just one hairy mallet too far? Or
Yeah, I think extended techniques need to be well integrated into the sound you're conceiving and what the piece is about. So they're not just, fancy party tricks. They've got to do something. So André Malert opens the kind of concertante piece with soup spoons on the bass wires of the harp. But that rhythm and that direction of the phrase is echoed in the snare and in the cello. So it has to integrate into the message of the music.
Great, great. Very much looking forward to it, Anne-Marie. So to play the world premiere of Anne-Marie O'Farrell's Three's Company, will you welcome, please, the 70-year-old RTÉ National Symphony Orchestra leader Elaine Clark, and conducting tonight's performance, Gavin Maloney. The second piece on the bill tonight is by Maria Minguella, whom we'll chat to in a short while. But first, I want to introduce David Fennessy, composer and teacher, and who has been acting as mentor to the composers throughout the Composer Lab initiative. David, this is a really valuable exercise, isn't it, to have a symphony orchestra to work alongside as you develop a piece. What is your role? I mean, I can imagine there's lots of roles that you have, but in this specific instance, how do you steer this?
Counselor,
yeah,
psychiatrist, agony aunt, uncle. I think I see my job as being maybe the first interface between the composer and their idea and transmitting it to this amazing group of musicians. So when we choose the composers back at the start of the process, there is a kind of, it's already quite tough to try and find composers who you think this might really benefit to work with this whole bunch of musicians. I mean, if you can see them here, it's not good for radio, but all laid out in front of you, it's the most amazing experience for a composer to hear those sounds and just to stand on the podium and to get that kind of immediate feedback. And as Anne-Marie was correctly saying, with somehow dealing with real people also. You can see their faces, you can see them struggling, or you can see them being bored, or you can see them being whatever, that you suddenly realize that it's not just little black dots on the page, but these are people who are doing this. Yeah. When we start out, the composers, then the first thing is total panic normally. This is our third year of doing it, about, oh my God, how am I going to write a piece which I have to deliver by next, I think it was the start of this year. So normally, I think that there's so many technical things in writing for orchestra that make it maybe daunting at first sight. Just things just to do with sheer numbers, orchestration issues. And it's often happens, maybe it's tempting at least for composers to adopt a certain kind of cloak that they use for writing for orchestra. So sometimes you'll hear that composers, when they write for orchestra, certainly in their earlier pieces, they sound very different from their other music. And this was, for me, one of the things I was really keen to try and find a way that the composers could explore the things that already interest them in their music. And that's why this project is open to composers who are already represented by the Contemporary Music Centre. So they've attained a certain level, if you like, a certain facility. So, you know, Anne-Marie and Maria are completely established composers with their own clear voices. And what I didn't want is that there's certain things that you might do in order to kind of make things easier for an orchestra sometimes as well. That's the first thing that happens. And so I see my role primarily in those stages about trying to encourage them to do the thing that they do already, but with this bigger canvas. Yeah. So for instance, in Anne-Marie's case, I mean, I know her music, I mean, for years, and, you know, it's kind of, one of its characteristic features is this kind of energy that it has, this kind of nervous ticking motor rhythms, and I think that comes from her background as a performer a lot. And sometimes when you try and imprint that into, you know, 50, 60, 70 people, you can lose something of that. And so this idea about having a concertante ensemble and stuff was a way of keeping things very tight in chamber, and then having this kind of palette of color. Like I think that was a brilliant metaphor that Anne-Marie was using, talking about this kind of test card, so that everything emanates from these three solo instruments. And so it was a way of building a bridge between their really intimate knowledge of these instruments and then it kind of creeping out into the orchestra. And I think what I wanted to do was for her not to lose all that energy, which sometimes happens when you've got large numbers of people playing, that it's quite to keep things tight. And so a lot of the time it was about doing less in the orchestra, actually, to take instruments out. And also I kept saying to her, just, you know, keep the energy. And I think she did wonderfully. It's so accomplished sounding. Maria's piece, on the other hand, is something completely at the other end of the spectrum, to do with a certain way of listening, a really unique way of listening that she explores in her music already, and that is not normally adapted to a symphonic orchestra setting a lot of the time. Because what you're really doing is exploring a sound in a piece. as opposed to lots of different colors and things happening. And in Maria's piece, she's really exploring a single music object, which has a kind of organic growth in it. And this is typical of her other chamber music as well. And again, it was kind of saying to her, no, that's, there was temptation sometimes to make it, in inverted commas, more interesting. And I was like, no, the interest comes from this listening, all these subtle colors and things that come out. So it was again about encouraging her to do the things that she already does wonderfully well.
Yeah, and it's a great, I suppose, celebration and consolidation of each of the composers' individual voices, of their voices as composer, that they are allowed and they explore their own colours, their own sounds that they gravitate to. Maria, can we talk to you? Maria Minguella, it's lovely to meet you. Great to be here.
I have some friends up there.
Some friends in the audience. Maria Minguella, born in Catalonia and living in Cork, a passionate advocate of social inclusion, human rights, equality and social justice, all of which feed into your creative process. Tell me about this piece. What was your first idea when you sat down to write this piece?
Yeah, it started back in 2015. I got a grant from a bursary from Cork City Council to spend 3 months with Gavin Maloney to start writing for orchestra. And during that time, I just had time to start looking more at instruments and what they could do. And I was looking at YouTube videos, just did a lot of research. And the wah-wah sound really stuck with me. I was like, oh, I just loved it. And that's what kick-started, really. And then when and then after that, there was 3 years where things kept happening and I wasn't able to do the piece. I wrote a sketch of it and I had kind of the main idea in it, but I didn't finish it. So when this opportunity came, it was just amazing, really.
And did you enjoy the experience? I mean, it must have been very stimulating and very opening up your own creativity on the spot, so to speak.
Yeah, it's just, when you're in that place where you have an idea and then you just run with it and make it like what you hear it and what you vision it to be and make it a reality. It's amazing and a wonderful experience, yes.
Yeah. Gavin, can we talk to you? Thank you, Maria. Yeah. Gavin, you're our conductor tonight, and you have been the conductor for all the Composer Lab concerts, and you're obviously very interested and have a keen pull towards contemporary music, and particularly Irish contemporary music. You're in a bird's eye position here, really, to see the development of these pieces from the inside out, from the kind of the germ initially to the flowering. That must be exciting for you.
It is. It's a cliche, but nonetheless true, that the conductor's role is to serve the composer, and this is probably clearer what that means when the composers are already dead. And it's perhaps a little bit more ambiguous when they're not yet. So the idea with this score usually would be that you try and kind of work backwards to get to some kind of essence of what the thing might be from which it grew out of. And although it depends, I mean, there are some composers like Richard Strauss could just write straight onto a long-form score, like Mozart could, and we know others, like Beethoven, who had all these notebooks and really went through kind of a struggle. And so with both this evening's composers, I think it was very different because Anne-Marie had copious notebooks and very clear ideas, for example, with harmony, the octatonic scale, and there was a rhythmic motif, and there's the idea of the dialogue between 3 soloists. And with Maria, it was really different. Her piece is very conceptual. And she spoke very well about what is signified, but the signifier is this wah-wah sound. So her creative process was to work with musicians from the orchestra to find out how to produce this sound on their instrument. So because of the diversity of the whole experience, it is very interesting.
Yeah, and your dialogue, I mean, your verbal dialogue with the composers must have been a kind of a journey, really, just being able to clarify as you go along. What exactly did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think I suppose my ambition for any composer involved in this project would be that by the end there would be no dialogue, that it would be so clear in the score what was their intention that it would be there for posterity.
Yeah. I mean, and of course you know recordings to refer to, so it's really coming to it fresh. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Great, thank you so much, Gavin Maloney. So thank you all for coming to this Composer Lab concert. Thanks to our sound engineers Richie McCulloch and Dave Gibson, John Bates and our colleagues in RTE Digital, producers for radio Anya Fay and Ian McGlynn, the staff of the CMC and NSO, our composers Anne-Marie O'Farrell and Maria Minguella, David Fennessy, and will you welcome again the fabulous RTE National Symphony Orchestra leader Elaine Clark, conductor Gavin Maloney in the world premiere of Maria Minguella's Wah Man.